Okay, I think it's just working. How's it going, guys? It's illumignostic. Happy Thanksgiving or sad National Day of Mourning, depending on which way you swing. I didn't necessarily jump on here today to really attack Thanksgiving, although I do think it's a really misguided sort of holiday. I'm going to talk more about the whitewashing of history and the continued present day exploitation of indigenous people that I've encountered here in South America. And also just kind of the general attitude of, it's not really even white people. I think that's a really unfortunate narrative that we have going. I think it's more about class, personally, and European people and people from the United States that sort of feel like they're just entitled. That people talk about white privilege, but it's something other than that. It's class privilege. It definitely transcends color. Although the majority of the people from Europe and the United States happen to be white. But yeah, there's definitely still a modern day. Happy Thanksgiving. There's a modern day exploitation economy in South America and in other places around the world. And the reality is that the people in the United States and Europe, whether they're aware of it or not, whether they would consciously participate in it or not, they are definitely standing on the backs of little brown people and others in order to maintain the lifestyle that they feel entitled to. And I think that, they don't necessarily have to give up that lifestyle, but they do need to the day of reckoning for the top 1% should be upon us, or should have been upon us a long time ago. Basically, the playing field has got to be leveled. Before we get too much deeper into all of this insanity, I want to mention that after this live stream, it's going to divert to our promo video for Ngaru Lodge Plant Medicine Retreats, and it's much more than a promo video. I did some interviews with a little bit of talking with Mama Celia, who is a Quechua shamana who had no contact with civilized, the modern world until the age of 17, and then I did a brief interview with Taita Juan de la Cruz, who owns the property at Ngaru Lodge, which is basically ayahuasca Stonehenge. I mean, according to him, the grandfathers and grandmothers of the medicine have been migrating to this property for thousands of years whenever there's some major decision that needed to be made, and congregating around this giant stone formation with this big spherical ball. If you guys have seen the thumbnail, you know what I'm talking about. There are petroglyphs on the land. And anyway, so we talk a little bit, and then we go to the cavern. There's a little bit of a plant walk. So there's a lot more to it than just like a promo video. So definitely check that out. But, one of the things that I wanted to jump on here and talk about is that, our history is being erased. And it was, a lot of it was a lie to begin with. Thanksgiving was sold to us as this occasion where pilgrims and natives came together, and everyone brought equal shares of food to the table. And what really happened is that natives saved a bunch of starving pilgrims, and then those pilgrims betrayed them and killed them the next year. And or at least tensions began immediately afterwards, and eventually it ultimately ended in violence. So definitely not consistent with the fairy tale story that we received as children. There was probably no turkey. It was almost definitely lobster and clams and that sort of thing, because that's the kind of food that would have been available to them at the time. But the real moral of the story here is, that the rewriting of history is extremely dangerous, or at least it would be if we didn't have a population that's so indoctrinated that it almost doesn't matter what you say to them at this point or what's written anywhere, but it still bothers me, my God, man. So a few years ago, they decided they were going to rewrite the history books in the public schools in the United States. And the Trail of Tears was definitely not voluntary. Nobody went because they wanted to. But they actually recalled the scholastic books in the United States, and they rewrote the story so that the natives actually went willingly. I think like 80% of them, or some crazy number like that, died of starvation and exhaustion and exposure and all of these things on the way. But hey, they just wanted to go for a hike out west because they really hated their ancestral lands where they had been living for thousands of years. And honestly, that moment was one of I think it was probably like 15 years ago or more. But that moment was when I really realized that we were in serious trouble. That there was something happening, that the powers that be had decided that they had absolute sovereignty to mold our perceptions however they saw fit. And of course, since that moment, when they decided to recall and rewrite all those history books, obviously it's gotten nothing but worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And so, yeah, I mean, that's just, if you aren't aware of that story, it's something that I just really wanted to bring up because, obviously it's pretty scary that sort of thing is occurring. And then, once you know that this has occurred once in United States history, you have to ask yourself, okay, if we know for certain that they've rewritten the history books at least once, how many other times have they done it? Is this really new? And I would venture to reckon that it is not new. And so to take this all a step further and into the modern day, people know that there are still child slave labor. Tesla uses components in their dashing effort to transform and save the world that were mined by child slaves. And these exploitation economies basically are engineered to maintain the status quo internationally. And I remember when I first started to really think about this, because I noticed that there were all these opportunities, even stuff online like Shopify. I came to South America and they pulled the plug on our store without explanation, without justification, right? And then when I tried to get back involved, it was like Ecuador and all of these other countries where no one has any money or just not allowed to participate. And then I discovered that all these cryptocurrency exchanges had also excluded all of these countries that where no one has any money. And they just point to legislation that disallows things for various reasons. But why is that legislation really there? And I started to suspect that the answer is that they have to keep these people down so that they can maintain a certain quality of life in places like the United States and Europe, and that it's very much deliberate. And I was at an ayahuasca ceremony with a couple. He had a PhD in physics, and she worked for I can't remember what they're, NGOs or something. And so we were talking about this, and I mentioned, I'm starting to suspect that this is all engineered, and they just looked at me like, you must be American or stupid or both. And I just kind of looked at them like, what? And they're like, well, they teach you about these exploitation economies and what you're talking about in colleges in Europe. This is not like some hypothetical thing that you came up with. This is something that is acknowledged, but definitely not in the United States. I don't think anyone's teaching classes about this kind of thing in the United States. And so it bothers me. It does. And it's not just, I'm not here, what do you call it, seeking validation, or what is that thing that the left is always doing? Virtue signaling, right? I mean, I feel like human potential that's really why I do what I do, right? That's why I serve the medicine to people. That's why I spent my life studying psychology and metaphysics and spirituality and all of this stuff, is that I had this sort of I guess even from a very young age, I understood that my fullest potential probably would not be accessed, and that a lot of other people are losing that opportunity because of what I perceive to be a sociological engineering or cultural engineering, sociological engineering that was designed to make people hollow and vapid and shallow and to lead these pointless, empty lives. And that is how it manifests in the United States. But that kind of oppression costs us just as much in terms of human potential and the realization of people's highest potential in places like South America and India and all these places where people are denied education, they're denied opportunities, and they're constantly, okay, so let me tell you, some of you guys have heard this story if you follow my channel, but one of the reasons we moved to Ngaru Lodge is that the woman that we rented the last lodge from for our retreats, it became obvious to me, she said it point blank to us with a client and investor present. So it was absolutely humiliating just to be associated with someone who would speak like this and not find any fault in it. Like, there's nothing wrong with talking like this. And she came down one day and she knew, I think she sensed that I would pay all of the local Quechua people, because it was in a Quechua community and very poverty stricken. I mean, no one's ever going to own a car in that neighborhood. You know what I mean? Never. Their walls are plywood. There's no windows. And honestly, they're happier than most Americans. But there is a very high incidence of alcoholism and even teen suicide because people feel trapped. And so, it's definitely obvious that the poverty has had some kind of impact, and that the people that do want to leave the jungle and experience, the modern culture, I guess, they know that is not going to be available to them. And so those suicides and alcoholism and stuff is a direct derivative of the fact that people like this woman that own this property are basically, there's a tacit agreement that there's an exploitation economy, right? Like, she said it out loud because she knew that we would screw it up for her. And that's what she said. She came down one day and she said, by the way, you guys can't pay these Quechua more than $15 a day, because if you do, then they'll expect it and you'll screw it up for everyone. And it's also quite common for people in like Vilcabamba, where there are a lot of expats. They'll say, don't tip, because if you start tipping, they're going to start expecting it, and then they're going to start expecting to make more money. And once they start to expect to make more money, we're not going to be able to come down here and walk all over them and take advantage of them. And you know what I mean? It's completely fucked. And it's like, the sense of entitlement is mind-blowing. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And actually, when that woman said that to me, I didn't really say anything at first. I went for a walk out in the jungle, and it really started the process, like what she had said to me. And then we were living in this village, like this property was in this village. And so before I opened my mouth, I wanted to make sure that she was actually legally doing something wrong. So I checked. I thought so, but I got online and I checked the Ecuadorian minimum wage, and it is $425 a month, which is already jack shit. And actually, what our investor client friend said about this is that you can already exploit the hell out of these people without breaking any laws. Like, you don't have to go that far, and you're still like $20 a day as opposed to 15 is still ridiculous. And if you can't afford to even do that, how pathetic of a person are you? And so I looked it up, and sure enough, it's like $22.50 a day or something like that. And so she was actually insisting that we pay them below the minimum wage, which was already jack shit, so that she could continue to exploit these people. And it is because she was a total failure. Like, all of her cactuses that she was trying to grow weren't bearing fruit, because instead of putting them on strings like everyone else, she put them on tires. So eventually I figured out that the heat from the jungle was heating the tires so much that the nutrients couldn't move through the, you know what I mean? Like she was burning them to death. You know what I mean? So it's like this, it's just horrific. It's just really horrific. And what I'm trying to convey to you guys here is that what I'm seeing down here in South America is what it's like after hundreds of years of pretty steady improvement in terms of, you know, people's general attitude towards human rights and equality, and it's still this bad. Also, you guys, do me a favor, hit the like button, share, subscribe, support us on Patreon if you appreciate this content and the kind of work that we're doing down here in the jungle. You know, this stuff doesn't, we had some pretty serious tensions. It's difficult to help too. That's another element of this, that, you know, these people have been taken advantage of by, you know, wealthy foreigners for so long that when I did approach them, you know, I thought that I could go to them and say, hey, look, you know, and I was also hoping that I could offer them, you know, employment at a higher wage. That I could go to them and say, you know, this isn't even legal what she's doing. Like, you guys cannot continue to work for her for, you know, this wage. And they basically told me to go fuck myself. They want nothing to do with foreigners. They don't want your help. They don't want any input from you, you know. So it's a really difficult thing to even bring any kind of relief to. You know, to be honest, I mean, it's a powerful lesson for me because my naivety got a swift kick in the face coming down here and seeing the actual realities of, like, trying to be like an indigenous rights activist, or, you know, and don't get me wrong, there are different groups and everyone has a different attitude, and some people are more receptive than others. And then you have some situations where the tribes will just completely try to take advantage of you. So it's a really, really complex situation. But, you know, one of the things I'm hoping to accomplish with this is, you know, I've seen a lot of people, you know, particularly conservatives and right-wingers out there saying that, you know, like, it's just that people conquest is normal, you know. The Europeans did it, Africans did it, Native American tribes did it to each other. The Native Americans attacked white settlements and killed children and raped women and did all this terrible crap too. The Seminoles were some of the most frightening people that have ever lived anywhere, and completely brutal and violent and sadistic and just crazy. You know, so they have a point, that there is that this is just something that happens, and, you know, you can't necessarily hold the fact that one side was a victor against them forever. But there is a huge difference. And that difference is that if there was a war between, say, France and England, or the Apache and the Navajo, or whatever, there would be some sort of conflict, and then there would be a winner, and then there would be some kind of resolution, and then there would be peace. The aftermath is not generally thousands of years of oppression, right? And exploitation and slavery. And, you know, there are plenty of nations that have gone to war and they've made reparations and they have good relationships now. We have not necessarily managed to establish that with the indigenous people. We, you know, there's a lot of Australians in this community lately. I'm pleased to see that. I always wanted to go to Australia, but I don't think I can because I have a criminal record. By the way, you guys, you know, if you have any off-subject questions, I think we have the premiere. I better check because I honestly don't remember. Let's see, let's see when this premiere is supposed to start. Looks like 8 o'clock, so we have 30 minutes to chat about all this stuff. So, yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. And so, you know, I would just like to encourage anybody out there that says this kind of atrocious shit, that feels entitled to stand on the back, or maybe you just don't know. I think a lot of people just don't realize that their wealth and the ease of their life, the cost that it's come to other people around the world. And, actually, it's definitely certain that a lot of people just don't realize it, because the United States government does all kinds of stuff that is so bad that most United States citizens refuse to even believe it. If you try to tell people, it's like trying to tell people that Thanksgiving isn't good. When you try to slaughter people's sacred cows, they're generally not super receptive to it. But slaughter we must, when these sacred cows are really super toxic Trojan horses, which is the case with these sort of situations like this. Again, it all of this continues to the present day. And as I think the cultural temperature sort of increases as things get hotter and hotter and hotter, and there are less and less shady places to stand, as the walls come crumbling down and our security dissolves, all of this animosity, all of these old vendettas, the people who were really just subservient and really innocent of wrongdoing, at least directly, could very well find themselves on the receiving end of a whole lot of retribution. And, that's an unfortunate circumstance, but it is, I think, very, very likely. So, by the way, for those of you that are just tuning in, when this stream is over, it is going to divert to a video about Ngaru Lodge, and I'm encouraging everyone to join us there. I feel like there's some other horrific things about Thanksgiving that, if you just think about the message that it sends, I guess, this sort of idea that, we're just going to be gluttonous and intoxicated on this stolen land and celebrate this treachery. I mean, it is, sort of the typical mindset that people really unknowingly engage in. And I think, again, that's kind of lost on a lot of people, that, they're not really aware of what they're, looking at them from the perspective of a Native American or a South American Indigenous person, while they're shoveling all this crap down their face and drinking beer and watching football. And, football, the great American sport, is symbolic of all this stuff. It's, the ball is the goods, and you have these guys who you have to use violence to take their land so that you can get the goods to the goal and deliver it and cash it in. I mean, it's all just completely barbaric, and it's really difficult for me to show up in the jungle in these indigenous communities as a white foreigner, knowing that most of the people that look like me or come from my country have come down here, and not only do they feel entitled to, I mean, you should see the way, even some of my guests, honestly, the way they'll speak to the help, the waiters, and just kind of barking orders at them. And, you would not, I don't think they would speak to someone like that in the United States, and they don't consciously think about it. But it's really disappointing, and difficult, to the way that these people have worked so hard to provide you with 10-cent bananas, so that you can have a tile floor instead of dirt, and windows in your house. And, they when they try to protest, they'll literally gun them down. Like the Dole Fruit Company and these fruit companies down here they'll just turn machine guns on them if they try to protest. That actually even happened in the United States, the Ludlow Massacre. And these kind of stories are important too. I'll get to that question in just a second, Mr. Charles. But, this stuff happens to American citizens too. And this is the kind of thing that, people really don't want to hear or think about. But the Ludlow Massacre, I think it was 1857 or something like that. And these miners in Ludlow, Colorado, had just, and they were like, it was like an encampment, but it's like a town. So they have their wives and children with them, and the owner of the mining company, because the miners went on strike, called up the president and asked for a favor, and he sent in the United States military with 50 caliber Gatling guns and mowed down like 400 people. And to this day, you can find like teeth and bone fragments, and men, women, and children. And these are U.S. citizens. We're not talking about the Dole Fruit Company gunning down indigenous people in South America, right? And I'm not saying that's less bad. I'm just saying that a lot of American citizens would not expect that the United States government would turn machine guns on people for refusing to go into mines. But it has indeed happened. And so what I'm saying is that, it's like that. It's not a meme. I think someone wrote this years ago about how, when they came for the Russians, no one did anything. And when they came for the Jews, no one did anything. And when they came for this and that and this type of person, and then when they came for me, there was no one left or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, don't think that you're necessarily exempt either. Okay, so we have kind of an off subject, although it's not off subject, because confronting your own shadow and moving through it to step through the other side is definitely part of how we can resolve all of this sort of ridiculousness that we're somehow still living with in our world. And he's asking, what measures can one take before, after, and during taking LSD to promote a spiritually healing experience and not just entertainment. I'll go ahead and expand that beyond LSD to any psychedelic. I mean, the way that you are living your life and your general disposition is going to determine how you are going to approach a psychedelic experience. That's just the simple and obvious answer. And so, the meditative practices, anytime that you're inundating the brain with breath, you are giving it the fuel that it needs to wire itself to create new neural pathways. And, one of the practices that I really advocate is to do a focused meditation in the morning, where you would choose maybe a tatwa or something, and like a square that's got a red line with a circle in the middle that has maybe a purple line or a purple circle, and if anything changes in the shape, then you have to start over immediately. And then at night you do the opposite, and it's that classic focusing on the breath, letting all of your thoughts pass without judgment. And of course, the practice of mindfulness is extremely valuable, to constantly monitor your own thoughts and, and to analyze and to look for the source, the original catalyst, the original influence that compels you to engage in whatever behaviors it is that are not consistent with whatever your true will is. So during the process, the best thing that you can possibly do to condition yourself, you can kill an addiction with this. I did it with cigarettes in a couple of hours. I literally forgot that I smoked. The next day, the only way I was reminded that I was a cigarette smoker is that I found my tobacco in the evening, and I was like, oh yeah, So if you take a moderate dose, something manageable where you can still maintain focus, and do pranayama, where you are inhaling and holding the breath in and then exhaling for a controlled period, usually the fourfold breath is a good place to start. And when you're holding the breath in, you're focusing on what you're trying to pattern. And when you're exhaling, you're focusing on letting go of that which doesn't serve you. And if you just do this for a few hours, it's incredible. When your neuroplasticity is enhanced, what you can get done in just a very short window of time. Let me see if there's another question here. Yeah, well, he's saying that the Native Americans would have been much better stewards but of course, I mean, these cultures that never developed this destructive capacity, or at least um, toxic byproducts and pollution, and it's also really interesting to me that like indigenous cultures generally didn't need prisons. People did do things that they shouldn't sometimes, and they had to be sent out. I forget the word is escaping me. We'll call it expelled, banished, I guess. But here's the thing. I think, in my view of the universe, things are as they should be, and and whether they are as they should be or not, they are as they are. And so, what we have to do, at the very least, like we can't go back and change time. We can't go back and stop the Dole Fruit Company from machine gunning indigenous people. We can't go back in time and stop the American settlers or explorers or whatever they were, pioneers, from gunning down all the bison to starve the Native Americans. We can't stop them from murdering children and raping women. We can't, conversely, stop the Seminole from skinning people alive and feeding them to alligators, and the Apache from cutting off people's eyelids and slowly lowering a burning ember into the, you know what I mean? All this stuff that all these people have done. We can't go back and change all that. But what we can do in this moment is to increase our own awareness, to increase our own capacity to monitor our own psychology, our own emotional state, our own energetic balance, and to simultaneously expand our freedom while having the courage and discipline to take responsibility for the obligation that comes with that great freedom and responsibility and power. And we have to have the courage to speak unpopular narratives, to speak unpopular truths, to challenge and confront people, to slaughter sacred cows. It's not a fun job. There's an old African proverb that I quote all the time, that he who speaks the truth has few friends. And unfortunately, it's absolutely true. As a plant medicine facilitator, I see this all the time because people's wiring's kind of coming loose. And, I'm constantly looking at the contradictory, the battle that goes on within people between their ultimately highest enlightened knowledge and understanding and their sort of inability to reconcile that with what they want to believe about the world. That is one of the most difficult things, I think, for people to accomplish. And it is absolutely essentially important because, we do have things that we need to fix. And I think it does matter, and the clock is running out. I think we're all pretty well aware of that. But you cannot treat cancer as if it's a cold because you refuse to believe that you have cancer. Objective analysis of self, first and foremost, is the only way to get a clearer view of the external world. And so that is why, we can go out and protest. You can go out and say shit to people. You know what I mean? You can do all this stuff, but it's not really going to be effective unless you have turned that light inwards and really not only figured yourself out and brought yourself into homeostasis, but you have to do that, and then you also have to find true balance and fearlessness and, objectivity in your ability to face the universe as it actually is, and, not as you can stand it to be, which is unfortunately what most people do. We have all these coping mechanisms. Another huge problem is that, our cognitive biases and cognitive dissonance and selective perception and all of these things that really sort of interfere with our ability to perceive ourselves accurately and to look at the world, the external world, in an honest light. All of that stuff is inextricably or nearly inextricably intertwined with our survival instincts. So we're really sort of driven and compelled by the most powerful fundamental forces of our being to be delusional. That's the long and short of it. You know, I mean, when we look around the world, it's easy to think like, well, all these fucking people are evil or stupid or both. And really what's going on is that the nephesh, the animal layer of the soul, has not been reconciled with the ruach, which is the intellect. And those two must be mediated and harmonized by Tiferet, harmony in the heart. You know what I mean? Like, you have to, come hell or high water, find ways to bring those things into balance before you can be an effective instrument to bring down fire from heaven, to be like a hollow tube to bring down fire from heaven and affect the kind of change that we have to see in accordance with the timeline that we're presented with, which I think is, you know, we have to act very rapidly. So this transformation must be very intense, and it must be very immediate. Otherwise, you know, I don't think there's much point. It's at right now, you know, I think we're kind of at a crossroads where it's like your dedication to freeing yourselves from cultural narratives, from religious bondage, from, you know, your own emotional traumas and personal history, in order to transcend all of that. The commitment must be total and absolute, and you know, that is our obligation. And then the ultimate reward, of course, is a degree of freedom that has never been known to mankind before. You know, I think that we're sitting in the wreckage of human history right now, squandering all of this opportunity. We have all of this amazing technology that is being misused. We have all this power that's being misdirected, and we have we have a pretty solid diagnosis. And, you know, there are a few basic things that can actually be addressed to affect real change. You know, the crisis of purpose. We have a bunch of people, you know, in the United States and Europe and around the world that have no real sense of connection to anything greater. They are not, their role as an avatar and conduit of the universal mind has been occulted from their view. And so they're unable to live with any kind of meaning and purpose and dignity and truth. And so we find ourselves in a blind alley, but with all of this surplus and all of this potential. And so the reality is that if we can constrain all these demons to work for the light and bring them under control, you know, calling all to arms in order to mitigate our ruin, this is something that is within the realm of possibility. And anything that's easy is unnecessary. We've been doing our secret streams on Masonic Degree 28, and last night, if you didn't see it, I actually did one publicly, and I talk a lot about this. But, you know, one of the big things that they were trying to resolve is, like, if there is some sort of divine consciousness and it's one, then how can there be evil? And how can you blame that evil on a separate being, call it the devil or, you know, whatever it is? You know, and the resolution to this big conundrum, this cosmic paradox, was basically that, you know, nothing good comes easy. And without pressure, like, you have all this carbon or coal, right? And without all that pressure, and most of it's coal, right? It's just like less than 1% of it that actually becomes a diamond, but it's all of that pressure. So it's all, and for us to ultimately create that gem for the chrysalis that we are in right now. And remember, it's probably dark as hell and weird and confusing when you're in a chrysalis, right? It's kind of like being in a coma. And the caterpillar cannot even conceive of the butterfly that's going to emerge once the chrysalis opens. And so, you know, that's what all of this is about. This is what all these, you know, the history of human atrocities, all of the confusion and chaos and evil in the world at the current juncture is all the pressure that is being exerted upon this raw material in order to create something that's capable of refracting light in ways that never could have been conceived of ever before in human history. And so if we are successful, right, the levels of the degrees of pleasure, right, like we are becoming the first modern generation that can do things like, drop acid and MDMA together and have sex and not have any guilt or shame about it. You know what I mean? Like, there are new pinnacles of experience that are available to us in all sorts of different forms. I just went surfing on acid a couple weeks ago. It was the most amazing thing you could possibly do. You know what I mean? And then the technological enhancements that we have, if we just are able to rediscover a sense of purpose, bring ourselves into alignment with it, then all of these things that are sort of functioning as vices right now with our, social media and our phones and all of this crap, if we have this sense of purpose, then all of those demons are constrained to work for the light. And so that is where we're at. And this is why we have to be grateful for the ancestors, because they're the ones that suffered and toiled in the mines. They are the ones that suffered and toiled in the deserts. They're the ones that lived and died in the darkness, so that we could have this freedom and understanding and knowledge and wisdom. And, so at the end of the day, perhaps it all does make some sort of beautiful cosmic symmetry and sense that results in the amelioration of mankind from servitude and slavery and superstition and the darkness. And perhaps it is because of these past calamities and misjustices and misdeeds and misunderstandings and misdevelopments and misdirections and all of this stuff that we have some hope of actually creating a paradisical world here at the end of time. So do me a favor, you guys, don't miss the premiere of the Ngaru video that's coming up next. There's some really, speaking of indigenous people, there are some really great, Mama Celia actually allowed me to bring the camera into the Moloko, which was new. Normally that's not allowed. And so, she sits on a tortoise shell, and she, I mostly explain it in English, but she's sitting there kind of talking about her shamanic tools. And then, and we also have a video that's the complete with an interview with Mama Celia, but that's going to be separate from this. But the Ngaru Lodge video that's coming up, if you just, it's going to redirect you to that video. And the message that Taito Juan de la Cruz has is very important, extremely poignant. He's speaking from the heart. I was actually pretty surprised at the depth and the clarity and power with which this man spoke, because it was kind of impromptu. I just basically said, okay, well, if we're going to come out here, then I need to get some video and we should have a conversation. And he had no idea what questions I was going to ask him. And you'll see there's no editing. So it's a battle of frequency right now, innate intelligence versus learned intelligence. Yeah, that's basically it, balanced shiz. By the way, you guys, hit the like button, share, subscribe, join us on Patreon if you're interested in our secret streams and other patron-only material. There are also options for supporting in the description. The battle of frequency right now, I mean, I wouldn't say right now. I think that's basically what the universe is. It's the interplay of antinomies, and so you can see it as a battle, or you can see it as a dance. And the reality is that it's both. But the act of creation is the act of destruction. It's just a different phase, and you can say it either way, and it's still true. And this is one of the most difficult things for people to wrap their heads around, I think, is the sort of necessity of all of the things that exist in the universe. It's really difficult to come to terms with. But I hear you about the battle of frequency. Really, at the end of the day, though, all of the consciousness that involved is just electromagnetic waves and the light that they generate. And so it's really just the light playing games with itself and talking to itself and singing to itself. There's nothing else happening. There are only two things in the universe, light and void. That's it. All matter is light in a standing wave, and it's true that the light is slowly consuming itself. And, so what we experience is going to be an expression of both the undulatory, creative action of the wave, and also the catastrophic results of the interactions and the interference of those waves from time to time. So, all right, guys, it is time to switch over to the other video. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe. Tomorrow I'm going to get the Mama Celia video done, and then we're going to have the cavern. We went into the cavern where there are ayahuasca ceremonies, and there were like giant spiders. I got hit in the face by a vampire bat. There was like, artifacts in the end of it that have never seen the light of day, probably. Giant whip scorpions all over the place. It was completely crazy. I got a bunch of video from in there. And as part of our retreats, we're not just doing retreats where you come and drink medicine. We're also going on all these excursions, expeditions to lagoons to see animals, tapirs. There's a tapir on Tapir Island that sometimes will approach you and insist on being petted. There's a coati at Ngaru, which is like a raccoon, cat, possum thing that is wild but comes down and like follows you around like a cat and likes to be petted. The macaw that lives on the mountain there is also friendly somehow. It's wild, but it comes down and lands in the shed, and you can pet it, and then it'll fly back away. It's just an insane place, the Amazon. I hope all of you guys make it. The March retreats are already filling up, it looks like. So if you're planning to come in March, you're going to need to hurry up and pay your 50% deposit because it's going to fill up. It's going to fill up fast. So if you're on the fence, you're not going to have an option if you hesitate too much longer, I'm afraid. So thank you guys so much for spending this time with me, and I will see you in the premiere.